All right. As Blake alluded, I'm going to talk a little bit today about plant collecting. And in the intro for the talk, the bio that I did, what usually comes to mind when you think about plant collecting is English gentlemen and waistcoats and pith helmets and lots of support folks carrying all their stuff while they kind of rape and pillage the natural world for rare and unusual plants. And not all those things are true. There's a little bit of truth threaded in that, but it's a much different, more kind of complex thing. One of the goals of plant collecting, obviously, is looking for new plants, but underlined in all plant collecting is some form of conservation, saving plants and helping other parts of the country and international with the best ways to do that. So that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to talk about today. So I'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing that you need to ask is why. What are you collecting plants for? And as I alluded to, in some cases, you're looking for new things for the nursery, or looking for things to conserve and help preserve and spread germplasm to other gardens, other partners that are involved with plant collecting. And if you think about conservation, the first thing that kind of comes to mind are animals, of course, pandas, tigers, and other endangered species. But 1 in 4 plants now is threatened or endangered, and that's pretty staggering. There's a lot more endangered plants in the United States than there are endangered animals by a broad ratio. So not as sexy as pandas and tigers, but a very important component to the natural world is the plant life. And the animal life doesn't exist without the plant life. So those things are very much intermeshed. And excuse me, heightens the importance of collecting plants from that perspective. So being in public horticulture, we kind of have some guidelines for plant conservation and public horticulture. I'm not going to read through these in the interest of time, but kind of summarizing them, bringing awareness to plants. Not many people know that 1 in 4 plants are threatened or endangered. Sharing that genetic material with other gardens, other entities, supporting folks to do that, and long-term preserving that genetic material so that it doesn't disappear from the earth, and also soliciting and finding funding and resources to support all of those things. We are a part here at the Raulston of the Plant Collection Network, which is part of the APGA, the American Public Garden Association. And it's a subgroup of the APGA that helps with curatorial practices at gardens all across the country and helps promote those professional standards. So the Plant Collection Network has been instrumental in getting public garden groups together and working with some partners to find funding and sources for plant collecting trips. Not to confuse our acronyms, but they can often be confusing. There's also a group called the Plant Collecting Collaborative. We realized on a plant collecting trip one time that it kind of behooves us to talk to each other and let each other know where we're going to be. Literally 2 ships passed in the night. We passed a group from some other gardens at the exact same time of the year on the exact same trail, looking for a lot of the same things. And if we had communicated better, we could have saved some time and funding. And so this group was formed to kind of help collaborate better and actually talk to each other. So I mentioned some collaborators with APGA, and here are a handful here. A lot of the obvious people you would think. The USDA is a big partner with plant collecting and plant conservation. Conifer Society, Magnolia Society, Oak Society, U.S. Forest Service is also lumped in there. There's a Global Tree Campaign. There's a lot of groups, and these are just a handful that we interact with here at the Raulston. I first got introduced to this world when I worked at the Holden Arboretum many years ago, and also at the Cincinnati Zoo that actually has a whole branch of what they do. It's called CREW, Center for Reproduction of Endangered Wildlife, and that includes plant material as well. But that's kind of where I got my first taste of plant collecting. And over my 30 plus years of working in public horticulture, I've been lucky to work with a lot of people that have helped me understand more about it. And I've actually gotten to travel with folks. The gentleman on the ground is Rick Lewandowski, who I met in the Delaware Valley. Ozzie Johnson is the other gentleman down in Georgia who we do a lot of stuff with. Tony Kirkham, lots of other people that we've done things with. And several years ago, as you can see by the lack of gray hair in these pictures, we did a symposium here where we got together and we talked about some of kind of the joint things that we are doing. There's Ozzie, Dan Hinckley, Scott McMahon, a gentleman that you may recognize who works here, Mark, and Andrew Bunting down at the end, who's been a collaborator and a friend of mine for many, many years. Andrew is probably the person that was most instrumental in getting me involved in plant collection. So there's my kudos, there's my thank yous, there's my recognitions. But that's an important component of this, is that network of people. So you have to have a plan in everything in life, and more so when you're doing plant collecting, so that you don't have people already in a site that you're trying to go to, that you're communicating with all your peers and fellow public horticulture plant collecting people. You have to have a wish list. What are you looking for? How are you going to pay for the trip, and where are you going to go? And probably the most important thing and the hardest thing to predict is time and timing. So you're traveling someplace sometimes where you don't live. You got to figure out when things are going to be in bloom, when things are going to be in fruit, and the weather's going to be optimal to take the best advantage of your time collecting. So there's lots of layers to it. You can see a plan in the corner on the left. This was a trip that we did down to Florida with a group of people. Taking advantage of lots of resources, maps, kind of figuring out the best places to go, looking at other plant collection reports people have went, and doing it internationally is a whole different spin and has lots more layers. So traveling, plane time, vaccinations. I have a whole host of vaccinations for a trip I did to Vietnam. Having a passport and being sure that the passport is up to date is very crucial. Not going to name names, but I have had colleagues who, a few days before realized A, their dog ate their passport, or that actually happened, or B, their passport is expired. So much more stuff entangled if you're traveling internationally. So locally is not as dramatic. Doesn't take as much logistically, but it does take a lot of planning. So taking advantage of things like plant lists and books that have been published that kind of list species, where they are, and kind of help you narrow down your wish list of things that you're going to look for. I've spent a lot of my life backpacking, and a big chunk of my life running ultramarathons and gearing up. We call it the shakedown of figuring out what you want to take on these trips is very, very important. And I actually like this part of it. I like that plotting and planning and laying everything out so that you can see it, so you have the right things. From a national standpoint, it's not a big of a deal if you forget something, because of the Targets, the Walmarts, and the whatnot of the world. You can go buy things. But if you're flying, say, to Vietnam or China, and you're out in the field and you forget a water purifier or something, that's a bigger, more crucial mistake. So laying all of that stuff out beforehand is a part of the process to get ready for plant collecting. So you've done all that, you've gotten your plane tickets, you figured out where you're going to go. The next most important thing is following that plan. Is you have to make hay when the sun is shining. You have to really use your time wisely, because typically you have a short window of opportunity wherever you end up collecting plants to look for things. So you spend a lot of time scouting, looking through the area. These are some of my colleagues on a trip to Kentucky. We've gone to one of the sites we're going to look for, and we're kind of getting a lay of the land and looking for some of those things on our wish list. Same. This is a big sky in Texas, where we spent the day looking for things on our plant list. And then, when you find what you're looking for, taking advantage and starting to collect, keeping track of all those things. And I'll talk about the processes that you go through to kind of record and keep up with what you're doing. A lot of times when you're someplace, you don't have ways to reach things that are kind of up high. And if you look to the left, you see the rental car is parked very close to the edge of the road. We actually had to get on top of the car to reach this Dutchman's pipe vine. I say that now since the used car dealership is long past in my rear view mirror. But here's what you're looking for when you're out in the field and timing things, which doesn't always work. This is Magnolia pyramidata. This is an endangered magnolia, and that seed capsule on the left, that pink seed capsule that's getting ready to. Yes. We spent a long journey on this trip through Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, and into Texas, and didn't really find what we were looking for until we got to Texas, and we're lucky to find that with a lot of local help with that. The picture on the left is an endangered magnolia that was on our list when we went to Vietnam and just happened to stumble across that, and then a handful of water tupelo, Nyssa aquatica, that had been high on our list on a trip to Tennessee, and we're lucky to stumble across that and find that. So what are those guys doing in the woods? It looks a little haphazard, a little suspect, but everybody has kind of a job that they're doing. The gentleman on the left at the edge of the woods is collecting herbarium specimens, and I'll talk about that in a second. Phil, one of my colleagues from Denver Botanic in the middle there, he has just put his GPS away. We'd taken GPS coordinates of things that we'd taken seeds from. And the other gentleman is taking notes. It's important to take notes as you go on so that you have records of what you've done from day to day. You're scouting, you're looking for things in all different types of rain. And, again, taking GPS coordinates, stopping for lunch. You can't go very far unless you're fueling yourself. And one of the things that we've found that helps take better advantage of time is splitting up these trips, because when you go to a site you've never been to before, you have to find the plants and locate them. And what we've found is doing scouting trips kind of before you do the collecting. So this is Andrew Bunting, and I believe this is Florida, where we're looking for Magnolia pyramidata. It's much easier to see when it's in flower than when it's in seed. So we went in early February, probably March, and located the plants, took GPS coordinates, went back in the summer, early fall when we knew the seeds would be produced. And instead of roaming through the woods and the sites trying to find those, we went straight to the GPS coordinates, looked for those plants that we knew had flowered, and hopefully they'd had a good growing season and had produced seed. So we're not spending all that time. I'm not going to say needlessly, but you spend a lot of time walking around looking for stuff, and scouting ahead of time really narrows that down. So this is a picture to kind of to show you some of the terrain that we're navigating in. So this is a ravine in Florida near Torreya State Park, looking again for Magnolia pyramidata. Very, very steep, lots and lots of brush. There's critters that we're looking out for, which I'll talk about later, but you can barely see my colleague Andrew down in the base. We were using a throw ball to kind of lasso seed of Magnolia pyramidata to pull it down, and we would pick it up. So not always fun and games when you're in the woods doing this sort of stuff. I mentioned herbarium specimens. That's an important part of plant collecting. You're taking vegetative parts and pieces of the plant and pressing them so that you're preserving that gene plasm. You're writing on that they have what's called a voucher, which keeps track of all the information that's on the site, host plant, companion plants, soil, exposure, all those different kind of cultural things, the date, the time, and the GPS coordinates all go in there, and you're preserving that so that you can share that with other people, and it preserves that germplasm. It's very time consuming, but it's a crucial part of plant collecting. So for every sample we take, we're taking one of these things, and they kind of add up. And oftentimes we'll end up mailing these back to where we go because they pile up as you move on. So you've spent a day out in the field, you've stumbled around, you've found things on your list you haven't. So back at the ranch, and in most cases, it's a hotel room, or if it's a lot of us, we'll rent a cabin or something close to where we're looking for plants. And once you clean yourselves off, rid of the critters that hitchhiked home with you, you go through your notes and start to clean and separate the seed. My wife likes to say that this looks like we're bagging drugs, but we're not. This is an important part of it. The seeds have to dry out. Some of them won't be cleaned for several weeks, but there's a lot of things that can be kind of cleaned up. And this is the opportunity to do that while you can still remember with your notes. A lot of times somebody would be there with the computer taking notes, building maps and all that kind of stuff with the GPS coordinates. It's much easier and smarter to do that when it's kind of fresh in your mind. And it's a crucial part of that. So you've spent all day out in the woods, in the mountains, in sites, and then you spend into the dark hours of the evening pulling all of this information together, cleaning the plant material. Helpful if you have a sink. Not conducive in a lot of hotel rooms, but you got to do what you got to do. So once you've done that, you can see in the picture on the left, we've got seed bags all over the room. Lesson learned: hang the sign on the hotel room, not for housekeeping to come in. I've had colleagues that didn't remember to do that. Housekeeping came in and threw all those bags in the trash, and you've lost days worth of work. So important to do that. My colleague Scott from Atlanta on the left, taking advantage of our hotel room and cleaning seeds before we proceed on the next day's collecting. International is its own flavor of pressure and sweat equity and nervousness of getting what you've collected through all those hoops to get them mailed and sent to the United States, and all the screening and phytosanitary stuff that you have to do. It's very, very stressful, and oftentimes things don't make it through, but this is some shots of that process in Vietnam. But coming back stateside, taking advantage of nature areas, preserves, wildlife management areas, those are the predominant places that we're looking for things in the United States. And just some shots of colleagues suited up for a day in the morning, fresh coffee, depending on where we are. Those are snake chaps, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But some of the amazing things with this sort of work is meeting the local people that are experts in their fields. And this is a group from Texas, where we've done some collecting for lots of things. This was a magnolia-centric trip, but great, incredible human beings doing really good work to help preserve these threatened and endangered plants. And there's always some cherries on top, things that you kind of find that you weren't expecting. So stumbling across these pitcher plants on a site in Florida when we were looking for magnolias, stumbling across old logging equipment in the woods. You kind of never know what you're going to find, but this is what we're looking for at the end of the day. And you can see those seeds starting to dehiss already in that seed capsule of Magnolia pyramid. Again, this is what we're hoping and look for, and you don't always find it. There might be a bad seed year. Inclement weather can kind of come in, but you never know. One place that we spend a lot of time is Torreya State Park in Florida. It's home to Torreya taxifolia, one of only 4 species found. It's a very, very rare conifer. Magnolia pyramidata also occurs there. So several years ago, if you remember, Hurricane Michael made a direct hit on this very important piece of land. So in concert with folks from University of Florida and Atlanta Botanic Garden, we went to do a survey of the site. And we're gearing up before we go in, and this is what awaited us. It was an absolute apocalypse. But plants are very resilient, and you can see behind my colleague Matt there, a flower of Magnolia pyramidata underneath all that litter of trees that kind of fell over. And the Torreya kind of made it through unscathed as well. But very important to make sure these plants kind of continue. So hearkening back to, it's a leisure activity. You're getting to travel. You're eating out in the evenings. It's not all wine and roses, and you learn some valuable lessons along the way. So having all your gear on the ground in an area that's chiggers is very haphazard. And this is a PG rated version of where these lovely insects decided to attack us. So I mentioned traveling near and far and some of the different layers that you encounter from a traveling far perspective. There's a lot more hoops to jump through and a lot more layers internationally. The scouting is a little bit harder to do. Traveling is much, much harder. Lots and lots of plane rides and stops, and it's important to make your connections and all that. There's a lot of stress and strain, and the permits, the visas, the passports, the vaccines, all that stuff. But when you get there, all that heartache kind of slips away when you're standing underneath one of the rarest conifers in the world, and with colleagues that are from the area that are as passionate about conservation and plant collecting as you are. You have to go with the flow. You never know what you're going to experience. The picture on the right, the gentleman in front of us on the moped actually had a chainsaw that was running on these logs that he had just cut, and we had to take our time before we could kind of get around him. Some of the areas that we travel in, and this is Vietnam, a lot of the indigenous people still live there. So being respectful and learning to navigate that. And again, there aren't a lot of trails, and it's not easy to get to these places. And this picture here kind of highlights the sort of terrain that we were going in, and also the dangers of one of our guides wielding a machete and making sure he didn't cut my hair closer than it already was. But this is my colleague Scott and Peter Zale from Longwood Gardens. And Scott had to say, stop and turn around and look behind where we just came from. So kind of soaking up those beautiful views and realizing how lucky you are to get to travel and go to some of these places. Absolutely breathtaking. Magnolias are very important to me, and I have an unhealthy relationship with them, but it's always exciting when you find things that are list. Here's Peter with some really cool begonias. And one of the layers that I get the most questions about traveling internationally is what do you eat? I'm pretty easy. You go with the flow. I'm not going to be that guy that has to have hamburgers for dinner every night. And we ate very, very well. And I like experiencing that part of the culture of where we are. And these are just some shots of us in Vietnam. When you're in the field, you're not going to go back to the car and drive into town and get Chick-fil-A. You're going to take advantage of your time. You're making hay. You're plotting and planning very close to the time clock with things. So eating in the field is very crucial. And 7 days in of eating the same glutinous rice and whatever processed meat that was, I don't remember, but you can see it all over Peter's face that it's time for something a little closer to home. So after that long trip, Scott and I are back in the airport. We did the sweat-worthy journey to check bags and get through customs and get to our terminal on time. And you can take the boy out of the South, but you can't take the South out of the boy. I mentioned partners for Fauna and Flora International, were who we worked with in Vietnam. And these are relationships that Scott has built up. They do a lot with orchids, but they've realized the importance of that plant layer with preserving wildlife as well in these very special parts of the world. So fun and games, just to kind of end with. Typically, we're looking for things that are in seed in very hot parts of the country. This is in Alabama in August. I grew up down there, but I'm no stranger to it. But it's hot when we're looking for these sorts of things. And that's my colleague, Matt, cooling off in a spring. Remember this, that's always something to think about and kind of plan for. We spend way too much time driving from point A to point B, and you get a little crazy along the road, and you just have to kind of go with the flow. Lions, tigers, and bears along the way, things to kind of look out for. I use these pictures in way too many talks, so I apologize if you've seen them before. But there's critters to be conscious of and take into consideration when you're traveling. Lots of snakes in the South, and we saw lots of snakes on some of these trips. This is actually in Buncombe County on a scouting trip that I did. I stopped to take a picture of a plant and looked down at my feet and was greeted by this beautiful creature. But things to think about and walk through, because you're in their environment and their world. So I actually saw some of these in Taiwan. The ever-present fire ants, they're even more aggressive in Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. But the icing on the cake with all of this travel is when you get to bring plants home, things that are rare and unusual, you get them propagated and you can share them with other gardens and arboreta. Always have to give a shout out to this gentleman. This is my friend Ethan down in Atlanta, who can make seed turn into these wonderful, beautiful things. And when you get to that point to a grown plant, it really kind of brings all that stuff home. So what's next? What's on the radar? COVID has put a damper on everybody's travel. Plant collecting has not lost on that. Traveling international has been very, very hard, and traveling around the country has been hard. I'm doing some work with this red flowered hamamelis, and down in Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas. I've got colleagues actually going next week to look for this guy in flowers so they can collect some germplasm and be sure this is actually this Hamamelis ovalis, that it is actually a separate species. But that's something that I want to kind of continue and bring to fruition. Want to do more stuff in the mountains and some of our wild areas here in North Carolina. I think there's a lot of untapped potential there to do some conservation and collecting there. From one end of the mountains to the other. It's a place that I spend a lot of time, and I think it's important to help with that conservation and preservation of those things. So that's it, fast and furious. I hope you learned a few things and got some questions generated, and happy to take those now.
Okay. Griffin has pointed out that you did not discuss snake traps like you said you would.
We're often walking and kind of roaming through, brush up to here in some cases. And the last thing a snake wants to do is interact with something so much bigger than you. And usually what happens is you step on something. Copperheads in particular rely on their camouflage. They won't move until you're almost on top of them. So they usually don't strike real high. The chaps kind of help that from happening. I always tell people that it's usually the third or fourth person behind you that gets bit. So I try to stay in the front. So I scare up the snakes, and then my colleagues behind me with the chaps are well protected. I think it's smart. Me personally, it's so incredibly hot when we're doing a lot of this work. That's something else to have to put into a suitcase or a carry-on bag. I say that and watch me get bit the next time I'm out in the field, but it's a very worthy layer of protection to have. It's just really important to kind of look where you're stepping, and having grown up in areas where there are snakes, I've got kind of a sixth sense. I tend to see things before other people do. And again, I've just jinxed myself. So that's the importance of that layer of protection.
Okay, John asks a question that I find rather interesting. He asks, what guides are used to help germinate the seeds collected in rare trees?
I am not a propagator. I'm the guy that snatches. I'm the guy that climbs up the tree. I'm the guy that spots the snakes. My colleague Ethan Guthrie down at Atlanta Botanic Garden has been very crucial in getting these things to live. And I'm not going to snub my nose at the folks here. We've been very successful in getting things to grow here at the Raulston. It depends on the plant. It depends on overwintering. It depends on if you're doing something from seed or cuttings. Internationally, it's hard to get things other than seed through. So, and a lot of things that we're collecting are not terribly hard to propagate. The biggest thing with things like oaks and other things is viable seed. So you kind of want to get the acorns before they've been sitting on the ground for a while and insects get to them. That's really important. You also don't want to introduce the next emerald ash borer or soil-borne pathogens. So there's a lot of guidelines to make sure that you don't do that. But I'm dancing around the question. I'm not real sure the best propagation methods other than relying on people that have had success with that sort of stuff.
Okay, awesome. Deborah's asking, what are several of the most exciting / dangerous places you've been?
Well, I did work in the Philadelphia area for a number of years, so that was pretty precarious.
Well, there you go, Deborah. There it is.
You know, I wouldn't. Dangerous is a strong word. You know, the weather can be very, very iffy. And on that trip to Vietnam, we had just kind of gotten into the deep part of the mountains where we were, and you could see the clouds coming over the mountains off in the distance. And it's limestone there, and you have a really hard time staying upright when the stone is dry. When it's wet, it's even harder. So there were a couple points there where our guide wanted to keep going, and I said, it's time to turn around. We don't want to get stuck up where there aren't any trees and lightning, wind, rain, and all that kind of stuff. That's where it kind of gets dangerous. So it helps to be old and weathered, and wise to those sorts of things. You know, it's just as dangerous being in the mountains in North Carolina. You know, with snakes and cliffs and that kind of stuff, and just kind of being wise and aware. I've got colleagues that have traveled to places where, you know, there are conflicts going on. I have colleagues that have been to the Republic of Georgia, not the state, you know, and there was a lot of tension there for a number of years. Those are where things can get a little bit scary. But if you're with people that are from that area, everything is above board, permits and all that kind of stuff. It's you really rely on those local connections for that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Okay. And we also want to know, what are 2 most wonderful places you would like to collect? So, okay, here in the US, where would you like to collect and what? And then international, where would you like to collect and what?
I really want to get back to Japan, the northern part of the country in the mountains where it's a little bit more remote. And there are some things that were kind of in the works before COVID with some international garden partners and colleagues here. That is as high on my wish list, is to get back up, you know, Hokkaido and that part of Japan. Sooner than later. I'm not getting any younger, and getting more cranky as I travel and less limber. You know, there's a lot of stuff in North Carolina I would really like to do. Texas is an amazing place to collect. It's so diverse. Oklahoma, you know, there's lots of places in the Southeast that I would like to do stuff, and stuff that's going to be hardy here and would be useful to the J.C. Raulston and in our partner gardens, and even the nursery industry from that perspective. And a lot of it is about the people you're with too. So getting to travel with my colleagues at the Arnold, Atlanta Botanic Garden, Denver, those places, it's as much about that as it is the list of things that you're going for.
That looks like all the questions we have. So thank you so much, Greg.
Yeah.
For doing this talk for us. It was really awesome. There was this one slide of a taxodium with some enormous knees on it. Where was that?
That was in Kentucky,
No
at a nature preserve. Yeah.
Wow.
And
that must have been something else.
There were quite a few of them, like a huge grove of them. You know, there's always those Kodak moments. Okay. You know, and it really makes you think about how something that has been on this earth much longer than you, and how fragile that connection is.
Wow.
And to get to see something like that, you know, you've got to put your hands on it.
No kidding.
Yeah, there's been lots of those kind of moments scattered through all the trips that we've been on.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks again, Greg. And thank you, everybody at home or wherever you may be tuning in. It's on the internet. Doesn't matter. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in with us this week. Next week, we'll be doing success with spring bulbs with Tim. So that should be fun and enjoyable. Tim's always a wealth of information about plants. And boy, when you get him talking about them, he can talk. So that'll be a lot of fun.
It'll be good. Definitely. It'll definitely be good.
We'll see y'all next week. Y'all take care.
Thank you.